strike aborted! Shutting it down!
What have you done?
It was the only way!
Foolish human!
You have to understand, the Gornak don't read. They conquer. They don't archive. They annihilate. So when their war fleet darkened the sky of Alexandria's cradle, no one expected the war to end because a middle-aged human with bad knees and an overdue book cart walked into a vault. But that's the thing about humans. We keep receipts. For 3,000 years, the Gornak hegemony had never lost a war. This wasn't arrogance. It was arithmetic. They possessed 12 star systems, a breeding cycle of 14 months, and a military doctrine so brutally efficient that their name had become a verb in 17 galactic languages. To be Gornak meant to be erased so completely that historians argued later about whether you'd ever existed at all. So when they turned their attention to the Sol Confederation, the rest of the galaxy yawned. Umans. Ambassador Threll of the Voss Concourse had said, twitching his antennae in dismissal. They can't even agree on whether their own planet is warming. They argue about sports for star's sake. The Gornak will roll over them like a tide over sand. And on paper, he was right. Humanity's military was a patchwork of national leftovers, private contractors, and a fleet of ships that looked less like warships and more like converted mining haulers. Their population was scattered across 3 systems, Sol, Barnard Star, and the pathetic little colony at Tau Ceti. Their governing body, the Sol Assembly, spent most of its time arguing about water rights and whether synth flesh pets counted as dependents for tax purposes. The Gornak ambassador, a massive quadruped named Warcon Vor, had laughed when he read the preliminary intelligence report. Actually laughed. A deep, rumbling sound that shook the plexiglass divider in the diplomatic chamber. They have no standing army, he said, his mandibles clicking in amusement. They vote on whether to declare war. They hold referendums. By the time they finish arguing, we will have already glassed their homeworld. The Voss Concourse, the nearest neutral power, had offered to mediate. The Gornak declined. The Sol Assembly, panicking, had offered tribute. The Gornak declined. They didn't want resources. They didn't want territory. They wanted a lesson, a demonstration. Humans had grown too bold, too loud, too present in galactic forums, and the Gornak had decided it was time to remind the younger races what happened to those who forgot their place. The deadline was 72 standard hours. Surrender unconditionally, or Alexandria's cradle, the human colony on Barnard Star, their second most populated world, would be reduced to molten slag from orbit. That was when the story stopped being about generals and admirals and started being about a woman named Ilara Mendez. Ilara was 53 years old. She had arthritis in her left knee, a fondness for terrible synth coffee, and a job title that made people's eyes glaze over. Senior Conservator of Pre-Contact Historical Artifacts. In simpler terms, she was a librarian. Not even a cool librarian with a laser gun. A librarian who spent her days cataloging dusty old things that no one had looked at in centuries. Her domain was the Vault of Forgotten Tongues, a climate-controlled bunker buried half a kilometer beneath the capital city of New Lisbon on Alexandria's cradle. The vault contained approximately 4 million artifacts from Earth's pre-space flight era, along with a smaller collection of alien relics acquired through trade, salvage, and, in a few cases, outright theft by human explorers who didn't quite understand that diplomatic gift meant something different to the Voss. Ilara loved her job with a quiet, obsessive passion that her ex-husband had once called concerning and her daughter called adorable. But, Mom, please talk to actual people. She loved the smell of old paper, even synthetic old paper, and the way a perfectly preserved scroll could feel warm in your hands, as if the person who'd last touched it was still there, breathing over your shoulder. She did not love the Gornak. She had never met a Gornak, but she had read extensively about them, their history, their laws, their customs, and most importantly, their treaties. Because if there was one thing Ilara Mendez understood better than almost anyone alive, it was that the past was not dead. It wasn't even past. It was just waiting for someone stubborn enough to read the fine print. The evacuation order came at 0600 local time. Alara was in the middle of restoring a fragment of a 17th century Japanese scroll when the alarms went off. Klaxons, red lights, the whole theatrical production. Her assistant, a young man named Theo with a nose ring and an unfortunate mustache, came running into the conservation lab with his datapad flickering. Alara, we have to go. They're saying the Gornak fleet just dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. Governor's ordering a full civilian evacuation to the shelters. Alara didn't look up. She was holding a micro spatula in one hand and a tiny vial of archival adhesive in the other. Theo, I am in the middle of a cellulose stabilization. This scroll is 800 years old. If I stop now, the fibers will crystallize and it will turn to dust by Tuesday. There might not be a Tuesday. The complete lack of Tuesday would also destroy the scroll. She set down the spatula and finally looked at him. His face was pale beneath the acne scars. He was 24. He'd never seen a real crisis, only the simulated kind from training videos. All right, start packing the Jovian collection. Priority on anything pre-2100. I'll handle the concordance. The concordance. That was what she called the alien section, though the official name was the Exoarchival Repository, subsection Gamma. Most of it was junk, broken Voss translation crystals, a Kreth funeral mass that smelled faintly of pickles, a dozen data slates from species no one had ever heard of because those species no longer existed. The Gornak had a habit of making things extinct, but there was one artifact that had always fascinated Alara. A scroll. Not a digital file, not a crystalline data matrix, but an actual physical scroll made from the treated hide of some long-dead creature, stored in a pressurized cylinder of inert gas. It was 3,000 years old, give or take a century. It predated the Gornak hegemony itself, back when the Gornak were not conquerors but a scattered collection of warring tribes on a dying planet. The scroll was a treaty. One of the first intertribal agreements the Gornak had ever signed. And Alara had spent the better part of 6 months translating it. It was slow work. Gornak script was not designed for subtleties. It was sharp, aggressive, full of angular characters that looked like claw marks. But Alara was patient, and she had a talent for languages that bordered on the supernatural. By her estimate, she was about 80% through the translation. She had not told anyone about the scroll. Not because she was secretive, but because no one had asked. The Vault of Forgotten Tongues was underfunded and understaffed. The Soul Assembly had cut its budget 3 years in a row. No one cared about old alien treaties when there were new alien treaties being broken every month. But Alara cared. And as she pulled the pressurized cylinder from its storage rack and felt the weight of it in her hands, she remembered a single line from the translation. A clause. A small, seemingly insignificant provision buried deep in the document's appendices. Any signatory found in violation of the terms of this concordance shall be subject to forfeiture of claims, assets, and belligerent rights, provided that a formal notice of default has been delivered to the offending party's designated archival custodian no fewer than 7 cycles prior to the invocation of punitive measures. Failure to observe the notice period shall render any subsequent action null and void ab initio. It was legalese. Ancient, dusty, probably unenforceable legalese. But Alara had been a librarian for 30 years, and she knew one thing for certain. Bureaucrats love technicalities, and the Gornak, for all their bluster and violence, were the most bureaucratic species in the galaxy. Their entire society ran on a framework of laws, precedents, and procedural requirements. They just didn't expect anyone else to read them. Theo, she said, her voice suddenly very calm. Theo, who was shoving scrolls into a transport crate with the grace of a panicked raccoon, looked up. Yeah. Cancel the evacuation. I'm sorry, what? Or at least delay it. I need to send a message. Theo stared at her. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken as the Gornak fleet took position in high orbit. The first wave of dropships was already descending, their engines leaving trails of plasma across the dawn. New Lisbon was a city of domes and spires, beautiful and fragile, and in less than 2 hours it would be nothing but ash and memory. Alara, Theo said slowly, "What are you going to do?" Alara Mendez, senior conservator of pre-contact historical artifacts, tucked the scroll cylinder under her arm, grabbed her datapad, and limped toward the vault's communications terminal. Her knee ached. Her coffee had gone cold. And somewhere in high orbit, Warcon Vor was preparing to commit genocide because he thought humans didn't know how to read. "I'm going to the library," she said. The Gornak fleet numbered 47 ships, 3 dreadnoughts, 12 cruisers, and 32 support vessels. Their commander, Warcon Vor, was a veteran of 17 campaigns and had personally overseen the subjugation of 6 species. He had never met a problem that could not be solved with orbital bombardment, and he did not expect humanity to break that streak. His flagship, the Unforgiving, hung in stationary orbit above New Lisbon, its main cannon, a spinal-mounted plasma accelerator capable of melting a city block in a single shot, already charged and aimed. Vor stood on the bridge, his 4 legs planted wide, his armored carapace gleaming under the red battle lights. Around him, Gornak officers chittered orders and status reports, their mandibles clicking in the sharp, percussive language of the military caste. "Status of the human defenses," Vor rumbled. Sub-Commander Vex, a smaller Gornak with a scarred eye cluster, stepped forward. "Negligible va Khan." 12 surface-to-orbit batteries, all of them outdated. A single orbital defense platform, non-functional. Their fleet has withdrawn to the outer system. Vor's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile. "They run already. Pathetic." "There is something else," Vex said, his tone uncertain. "We received a transmission from the surface. A civilian channel, directed specifically to this ship." "A surrender?" "No, Warcon. It is a request for a meeting. From a human who claims to be a conservator of historical records." Vor blinked. His secondary eyelids slid sideways, a sign of confusion. "A historian?" "She calls herself Alara Mendez. She says she has information relevant to our claim of sovereignty over this system. She cites the Yiltari Concordance." The bridge went quiet. Every Gornak officer knew the name. The Yiltari Concordance was the founding document of their civilization, the treaty that had ended the tribal wars and united their species under a single code of law. It was sacred. It was also, as far as anyone knew, unenforceable. The original had been lost for millennia, destroyed during the first expansion. "Impossible," Vers said. "The Concordance exists only in fragments. The humans could not possibly possess a complete copy. She claims to have the original. Physical medium, verified by carbon dating and spectral analysis." Ver was quiet for a long moment. His officers watched him, their antennae twitching. They knew their Warcon. They knew his temper, his pride, his absolute certainty in the righteousness of Gornak law. He was not a creature who hesitated. But the Concordance, that was different. That was not just law. That was identity. To ignore a citation of the Concordance was to ignore the very foundation of Gornak society. It would be unthinkable. It would be heresy. "Bring her up," Vor said finally. "Alone. Unarmed. If this is a trick, we will show her ancestors what happens to those who mock sacred texts." The shuttle ride from the surface to the Unforgiving was the longest hour of Alara's life. She sat in a cramped, windowless compartment, her hands wrapped around the scroll cylinder, her stomach doing slow somersaults. She had never been in space before. She had never been on a warship. She had certainly never negotiated with an alien warlord. She thought about her daughter, Mira, who was on Earth, safe, probably still asleep, unaware that her mother was about to become either a hero or a very small crater. She thought about her ex-husband, who had always said she cared more about dead things than living people. She thought about Theo, who had looked at her like she was insane when she climbed into the shuttle, and who had promised to start the evacuation if she wasn't back in 2 hours. 2 hours. That wasn't a lot of time to convince a genocidal alien that his entire legal basis for war was invalid because of a late fee. The shuttle docked with a clang that shook her teeth. The airlock cycled, and Ilara stepped onto the bridge of the unforgiving. It was overwhelming. The Gornak were huge, 4 meters long from head to tail, built like armored bears with too many legs. Their carapaces were dark gray, almost black, and their eyes were clusters of red facets that reflected her tiny human form from a dozen angles at once. The air smelled of copper and something else, something sharp and chemical, their pheromones, maybe, or the coolant from the plasma conduits. Warkon Vor was the largest of them. He stood on a raised platform at the center of the bridge, and when he looked down at Ilara, she felt like a mouse being studied by a very patient cat. "You are the historian," he said. It was not a question. "Senior conservator Ilara Mendez," she replied. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm the custodian of a Yiltari concordance. Force mandibilis clicket." "Show me." Ilara held up the cylinder. A Gornak officer stepped forward, took it from her with surprising delicacy, and carried it to a scanning station. A beam of light passed over the cylinder, then over the scroll inside, analyzing its molecular structure, its age, its origin. The officer turned to Vor. "Authentic, va Khan. The seal matches records from the Temple of First Voices. The hide is from a tusked grazer, extinct for 2,000 years. The ink is consistent with pre-unification rituals." Vor's expression did not change. It was hard to read Gornak faces, Ilara had learned, but something in his posture shifted. A slight relaxation of his shoulders. A lowering of his head. "You have our gratitude for preserving this," he said. "Return it to our care, and we will ensure your death is swift." Ilara swallowed. "With respect, Warkon, I'm not here to return it." The bridge went very still. Vor's eye clusters fixed on her, and she saw the reflection of her own face in those red facets, small, fragile, absurdly out of place. "Explain," Vor said. Ilara took a breath. Then she took another. And then she began to speak. The Yiltari Concordance is not just a historical document. It is a binding legal treaty, and it remains in effect unless explicitly superseded by subsequent agreements. I've reviewed your hegemony's legal code. No such superseding agreement exists. The Concordance is still the supreme law of the Gornak people. Fo's tail twitched. The Concordance governs relations between Gornak. Not between Gornak and outsiders. "Actually," Ilara said, pulling out her datapad, "that's not correct. Section 7, subsection 3, clause 14. I have the translation here. The terms of this concordance shall extend to any sentient being with whom the signatories engage in formal discourse, provided that such discourse has been recorded in the official annals of the signatories. The Gornak engaged in formal discourse with the Sol Assembly 6 months ago. Your ambassador spoke in your official capacity. That discourse was recorded. Therefore, the concordance applies." Fo was silent. Around him, his officers exchanged glances. This was not a situation covered in their tactical manuals. Furthermore, Ilara continued, Article 12 of the Concordance explicitly prohibits any act of belligerence against a party engaged in good faith negotiations unless a formal notice of default has been delivered and the notice period has elapsed. The notice period, as defined in Appendix G, is 7 cycles. A Gornak cycle is approximately 41 standard hours. 7 cycles is approximately 12 days. She looked up from her datapad, directly into Vor's faceted eyes. "You gave us 72 hours, Warkon. That is not 12 days. Under the terms of the Yiltari Concordance, your bombardment of Alexandria's cradle would be illegal. Not immoral, not unethical, illegal. And, as a signatory to the Concordance, you are bound by its provisions. If you fire a single shot, you will be in violation of your own supreme law." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ship's engines seemed to quiet, as if listening. Then Ver laughed. It was a terrible sound, a grinding, chittering noise that went on for too long. You think laws matter here, human? We're the Gornak. We make the laws. We break them when it suits us. Do you? Alara asked. Because I've read your history. I know why the Concordance was written. Your species was tearing itself apart. Wars over water, over territory, over insults. 3,000 years ago, your ancestors came together and signed a document that said no more. They agreed to be bound by rules, to settle disputes without annihilation. That document saved your species from extinction, Warcon. And every Gornak since then has honored it. Not because they had to, because they chose to. She stepped forward, ignoring the way the officers tensed. You can kill me. You can burn this planet. You can erase every human in the galaxy. But you cannot erase the Concordance. It is here. She tapped her temple. It is here. She tapped the scroll. And if you violate it, every Gornak who comes after you will know. They will know that Warcon Vor was the one who broke the chain. The first Gornak in 3,000 years to put victory above honor. Vor's mandibles closed slowly. His eye clusters dimmed, then brightened. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost thoughtful. You are very brave for a creature with no carapace. I'm not brave, Alara said. I'm a librarian. We're just too stubborn to let things go. The standoff lasted 3 hours. On the surface of Alexandria's cradle, the evacuation continued despite Alara's request to delay. Theo had waited 90 minutes, then given the order. The shelters were full. The spaceport was chaos, and the sky above New Lisbon was a tapestry of light as dropships and civilian transports fought for altitude. On the unforgiving, Alara sat on a crate in the corner of the bridge, sipping water from a Gornak container that tasted faintly of iron. Vor had not killed her. He had not even threatened her again. Instead, he had retreated to a private chamber with the scroll and a team of his own legal advisors, leaving Alara under the watchful eye of Subcommander Vex. You understand, Vex said, his mandibles clicking in what Alara had come to recognize as uncertainty, that even if the Warcon agrees with your interpretation, he cannot simply withdraw. He would lose face. His rivals would challenge him. There would be civil war. Alara nodded. I know. Then what is your goal? She thought about it. The truth was, she hadn't expected to get this far. She had expected to be killed immediately, her body dumped into space, the scroll taken and forgotten. But Vor had listened. He had listened, and that meant something. It meant the Gornak were not the mindless conquerors the galaxy believed them to be. There was something more complicated, something almost human. My goal, she said slowly, is to give you an out, a way to save face. You don't have to admit defeat. You just have to follow your own laws. That's not weakness. That's integrity. Vex's antennae twitched. The Warcon does not care about integrity. Maybe not, but his ancestors did, and his descendants will. Alara set down the water container. The Concordance isn't just a treaty. It's a story about a species that almost destroyed itself, and then chose not to. That story has lasted 3,000 years. Are you really going to be the one who ends it? Vex did not answer, but he looked toward the door of Vor's private chamber, and his mandibles clicked once, softly. When Vor emerged, he looked different, not smaller. He was still enormous, still terrifying, but diminished somehow, as if he had been carrying a weight that he had only just noticed. He walked to the center of the bridge and turned to face Alara. His officers gathered around him, their postures rigid, their eye clusters fixed on their commander. The human's interpretation is correct, Vor said. His voice was flat, emotionless. The Yiltari Concordance applies. The notice period has not been observed. Therefore, under the supreme law of the Gornak people, this belligerent action is null and void. A murmur ran through the bridge. Some of the officers looked relieved. Others looked furious. One, a young commander with a fresh scar across his carapace, stepped forward as if to protest, but Vor raised a single claw and the commander froze. We will withdraw, Vor continued. We will observe the required notice period, and then we will return with full legal authority and finish what we started. He turned to Alara. You have bought your people 12 days, human. Not more. Use them well. Alara stood up. Her knee screamed in protest, but she ignored it. She looked up at Vor, really looked past the armor and the claws and the faceted eyes, and saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. Reluctant, grudging but real. 12 days is a long time, she said. Do you know what humans can do in 12 days? Vor tilted his head. What? We can read. She pulled out her datapad and tapped a file. A holographic projection flickered to life above her palm, showing page after page of dense text. Gornak text. Legal text. Treaties, amendments, precedents, rulings. Every scrap of Gornak law she had been able to find in the past 6 months cross-referenced, indexed, and translated. You think the concordance is your only vulnerability? Alara said. Warcon, the concordance is just the beginning. I have found 17 separate treaties, 8 trade agreements, and 3 territorial accords that your hegemony has violated in the past century alone. Most of them carry penalties. Forfeiture of claims. Reparations. In extreme cases, dissolution of belligerent rights. She stepped closer, close enough to touch his armored hide. You came here to conquer us. But you forgot something important. Humans are not strong. We're not fast. We are not smart. But we are stubborn. And we have spent the last 10,000 years writing things down. Every promise. Every contract. Every loophole. We don't forget, Warcon. We archive. War stared at her. His mandibles parted slightly, then closed. For the first time since she had arrived, Alara saw something other than confidence in those red, faceted eyes. She saw doubt. You are threatening us, Ver said slowly. With paperwork. I'm not threatening you, Alara said. I'm informing you. The Soul Assembly has already filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Arbitration Council. We've submitted evidence of 17 treaty violations. We've requested an emergency injunction against further hostilities. And we've hired the best legal team that human credits can buy. She smiled. It was not a nice smile. You wanted a war, Warcon. Congratulations. You're getting one. But it's not going to be fought with plasma cannons. It's going to be fought in court. And I hate to break it to you, but your species has been very, very bad at paperwork for the last 3,000 years. The bridge erupted. Gornak officers shouted over each other, their mandibles clacking in outrage, their claws scraping against the deck plates. Ver raised both arms, and the noise subsided, but barely. This is absurd, Ver said. No court would. You cannot possibly. There is no precedent. There is now, Alara said. And the best part is, you can't bomb a court. You can't intimidate a judge. You can't conquer a legal precedent. The moment you try, you prove that the Gornak hegemony is not a civilization at all. Just a gang of thugs with big guns. She turned her back on him. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done, showing her unprotected spine to a creature who could crush her skull with one claw. But she did it anyway. She walked toward the airlock, her limp more pronounced now, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. At the door, she paused. 12 days, she said without turning around. Use them well, Warcon. Read something for a change. The Gornak fleet withdrew exactly 47 minutes later. The dreadnoughts turned first, their massive engines flaring as they accelerated toward the jump point. Then the cruisers, then the support ships. Within 2 hours, the sky above Alexandria's cradle was clear, and the only lights were the stars. On the surface, Theo was crying. He tried to pretend he wasn't, but Alara saw the tears tracking through his unfortunate mustache, and she didn't say anything. She just sat down on the tarmac outside the spaceport, her back against a luggage cart, and stared up at the empty sky. 12 days, Theo said. That's all we bought. 12 days is an eternity, Alara said. Do you know how many treaties the Gornak have broken in the last century? 17. Do you know how many they've broken in the last decade? 9. Do you know how many they've broken in the last year? Theo shook his head. 3, Alara said. 3 treaty violations in 12 months. And each one comes with a penalty. Reparations. Territorial adjustments. In one case, dissolution of belligerent rights entirely. The Gornak hegemony is a paper tiger, Theo. It always has been. Everyone was just too scared to look at the fine print. She pulled out her datapad and tapped the screen. A document opened. A draft of the legal complaint she had been working on for months, long before the Gornak had even arrived. It was 400 pages long, and it was beautiful. The war isn't over, she said. But we're not going to win it with bombs. We're going to win it with footnotes. Theo stared at her. You're insane. Probably Ilera agreed. But I'm also right. And in the end, that's what matters. 3 months later, the Galactic Arbitration Council handed down its ruling. The Gornak hegemony was found in violation of 17 separate treaties, 9 trade agreements, and the Yiltari Concordance itself. The penalties were staggering. Reparations amounting to 3 years of their GDP, territorial concessions that reduced their hegemony by 4-star systems, and, most humiliating of all, a mandatory audit of all future military actions by an independent oversight committee composed primarily of human legal experts. The Gornak appealed. They lost. They appealed again. They lost again. They threatened to withdraw from the council entirely, but the Vos Concourse and the other major powers made it clear that such a withdrawal would be met with sanctions that would cripple their economy. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Gornak hegemony had lost a war, and they had lost it to a species that didn't even have standing army. Warkon Vor was stripped of his command and exiled to a remote asteroid station. In his final statement to the Gornak High Command, he said only this: "We underestimated them. We thought they were weak because they did not fight, but they did fight. They fought with paper and ink and the stubborn refusal to forget. And we lost because we did not understand that a librarian with a scroll is more dangerous than a soldier with a bomb." On Earth, Ilera Mendez was given the Sol Assembly's highest civilian honor. She accepted it with her characteristic awkwardness, then went back to work. The Vault of Forgotten Tongues received a massive budget increase, and she hired 12 new assistants, including Theo, who kept his mustache despite her gentle suggestions. She never saw Vor again, but sometimes late at night, when the vault was quiet and the only sound was the hum of the climate control systems, she would pull out the Yiltari Concordance and run her fingers over its ancient hide surface. 3,000 years old, and still sharp, still dangerous, still waiting for someone to read it. The galaxy learned a lesson that day, not about human strength, or human courage, or human technology. They learned something far more terrifying. They learned that humans remember, and we never forgive late fees.